Assalamu alaikum. Mohtaram Nazreen, Pend Online tarafı goytno to isu mai barut salam to dua. Umid që të jesu khairit san. Jit kem zëm të e pai asë ke haftë bronco has already elan ki jus jenuvol reth asja jenuvol ki session asën të masën totally as focused thing with you must budget që jem jatsan që PhD karun ja England is mazan ja USA is mazan ja never mulkan mazan. The focus was human session hund rather than panel discussions if can iskaran sign ishwan per se masras maskan maslu shasa human mun focus was sirf timan cheezen pattern the ach zimnus mazan human lecture series per bari te aschala this workshops es chalre mit es timan read lag karan yen bari inshallah yem hafte pat anwes nay sessions in ejuk session chu البته وين شو أخ مسألة كيونكي يس يم session relevance يس شيء يس image يشو relevance such तमाम युस student community in general तिमन खतर इसीलिए युस ऐसे mode of engagement रोज या ज़बान मस इसका सो ऐसे अंग्रेज़ तथ खतर शु माजरत की यम सुन audiences च क्योंकि तिम आश्चर्य सुन वारिया audience base युस च तिम च यसान ऐसे इसका कोशिश करते हैं का तो सुन program तो रोज कोशिश करते तो सुन च सिर्फ यह commitment थी सुन ची कोई कोशिश कैसे करो कोशिश बैठी पानी programs अलबत्ता ये मिच अहमियत च तमामन ये तलबा च students ये च कशीर मास ते कशीर नेबर ते एनी मुझे चीज करानी अंग्रेज़ बैठन तो maybe थोड़ा थोड़ा ना ऐसा कुछ उर्दू पे understand and for our non-kosher audiences, a very warm welcome and thank you so very much for joining us. And as you must have already seen from the posters, because that's mainly the reason why you joined us, just to brief you a little bit about or run you through this endeavor of ours. So today's session is actually a continuation of the endeavors that Bend Online has been engaged with for the last couple of years, where our main commitment is actually facilitating the process of these students, especially from Kashmir or the aspirants who try to pursue their higher educations and research in academia in countries like the UK, the USA, or other European countries. So in that regard, we've done quite a bit of sessions last year, before that as well. We've done some workshops as well where we've teased out the process and how we engage and plan about this and how we navigate these things. And in that regard, we did a lecture series last year where we teased out very important aspects of research or academic writing, about research questions, literature review, methodologies, and theoretical frameworks. And this year also we are adding on to that. And today's session is actually a continuation of those things. And for our audiences who joined us new, you could find these sessions on our YouTube, on our Facebook and Twitter handles. And we are kind of like replugging what we did in the previous years, so it would be quite fresh on our timeline, and you can find that. And it's in that regard we are doing today's session, which is now live streaming on your profiles or on your channels. And today's session is more about like we're actually trying to sort of give answers to the multiple or the loads of queries and questions that we've had from students, especially from Kashmir, asking about like, because there is a little bit of that haziness around this idea of pursuing research or PhD in particular. And we are trying, rather than creating questions or engagements or themes ourselves, we are just trying to club the questions or queries that we've received from you in our inbox through comments or in the email, and trying to give answers to those. And in today's panel, to give answers and to give guidance on those issues, we are joined by Vasim Yaqub and Nika Chatterjee, and quite thankful to both of them for joining us and making out their very precious time for today's session. Vasim, as you might have seen on the posters already, Vasim has done his PhD from the University of Cambridge and started teaching at Cambridge and now teaches at QMUL, which is the Queen Mary University of London. Likewise, Mahika has done her PhD from University of Oxford, where she started teaching and now teaches at the University of Bath. Mahika and Vasim, thank you very much for joining us today, and a very warm welcome to both of you on Pend Online. So, Mahika, the questions today, we are flooded with questions, and the time's quite less, so I'll straight away come to you regarding the question. The first question that I want to ask you is regarding the specific context of Kashmir. If we talk about Kashmir, there's not much mainstreaming or prevalence of this career guidance or options beyond like like the traditionally existing options. So for many, there is a notion that it's the next logical step, in the sense that we did our masters, we did bachelor's followed by masters, and maybe this is the next step. Do you agree with this sort of a mentality? Is it the right approach for the students who are wishing to do a PhD in the UK or the USA, or in general wishing to do a PhD? Do you agree with this sort of approach towards PhD, that this is the next logical step, Nida?
Thank you for having me, and Tosif, thank you for bringing this panel together. I'm delighted to be here. That's an excellent question, and this is true for Kashmir, but also the mentality that you speak of is also true for India and much of other parts of South Asia, where the next logical step, as it were, is considered a PhD. I don't necessarily agree with that statement. I think that the PhD, given the time and the cost implications that it can have, should be more of a deliberate step rather than a default. The reason why I say this, I think in some ways the question relates to, fundamentally what someone who is interested in a PhD should ask oneself why the PhD, and what it is that the PhD will lead to in terms of next steps. So one of the questions that I would start out with by thinking is that, do I want to be in academia? And why do I want to be in academia? Do I want to be in academia because I want to do teaching, research, writing, and contribute to an intellectual environment that is structured in a specific way within the academia? If the answer is yes, then yes, PhD is a necessary qualification to join the academia. But if it is research and writing per se that one is particularly keen on, then I think that today there are other kinds of programs and there are other ways of being a very serious researcher and contributing towards important pieces of writing, both creative but also in terms of speaking to policy and politics, by doing master's degrees that combine perhaps with a particular kind of a professional degree, so journalism or writing, creative writing. So there are other ways in which one can do research and writing rather than doing a PhD per se. So I think I'll stop there, but I would love to hear what Wasim has to say about this question as well.
Totally agree with you, Mihika, that this doesn't have to be the default sort of like the navigation that after your master's, like come whatever may come, you do it for the heck of it just because you're done with your master's and now the next step is PhD, definitely. And Wasim, here, I would like to ask you what Mihika said, that there are multiple options of doing research. What we see from our interactions with the students, that many students, many a times, are interested to do research, but then they don't want to go through this rigorous sort of like academic training of doing a PhD and then getting into the research. And there are multiple manifestations of research. For instance, what Mihika also said about like policy information or working with think tanks. Apart from doing this academic sort of rigorous training of PhD and going into the academic manifestation of research. So in the specific context of Kashmir, the question would be, who do you think should then think about a PhD? And those who don't want to go through this rigorous process of a PhD, but still want to contribute to research, what sort of options are there in your opinion for them?
Well, first of all, thank you, Tasif, for inviting Mihika and I, and thank you everyone in the audience for coming. I think these are really important and interesting questions, and in a way, my answer is going to be quite similar to Mihika's. You should not see doing a PhD as a necessary or an obvious next step from a master's, right? It's a very different kind of procedure. As Mihika said, it's a very long time investment. It is a lesser time investment in the UK than in the United States, where PhDs run for 6 to 7 years. But even in the UK, it's technically 3 years, but usually takes 4 years. And you can use a PhD in a particular field as a way of qualifying yourself further to do research in a government-affiliated institute or a non-governmental organization. But often a master's in a specific field, such as international development, will be enough of a qualification. And actually, doing a PhD and being out of the rest of the workforce for 4 years often can put you at a disadvantage even. So what I'd say is if you want to do a PhD in order to do research that's more sort of practically applicable, policy or non-governmental work, then a PhD is not the obvious choice. And if you like writing and research and policy, there are other ways, as Mika said, where you can fulfill yourself. One thing I would say then, a more positive reason for doing a PhD then in the humanities and social sciences, I can't really speak to science and technology, is if you want some relative freedom to develop your research interests. You do want time to write. You want the time to think as well. Things you might not have as much freedom to do in a policy organization or a charity or so on. Then an academic career is a good idea. But one thing I think we'll both end up stressing is it's also quite a stressful career trajectory, right? Doing a PhD does not guarantee you a decent job at the end, right? Chances of getting a decent job will vary country to country, but in the UK, you should not assume that getting a PhD will get you into an academic research post afterwards. So you do have to be prepared to think flexibly and think about a job outside of academia if you do a PhD. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Wasim. I mean, like you hit the nail on the head. Because there's generally this rosy picture that you do the PhD and then life is hunky-dory, you get a very posh kind of a job and like everything moves so smoothly. The background is that there's this added element or that persistent element of precarity that you always have. And given the shape that academia has taken over the time and now with the kind of how market is shaping globally, how much of impact it has had on academia. In fact, we are striking in a couple of days for better work conditions, isn't it? So we shouldn't have this, like, if we have a rosy picture, as Wasim says, that like life is going to be very fun after doing PhD or even during PhD, that's not the option. I think like we have to be prepared with that. It's a very stressful journey. It's a very rigorous sort of a training. And the career options in itself, they aren't very promising, but at the same time, like, we don't also have to be sort of like dismayed or discouraged that there's no life afterwards. But then, yeah, it's quite a bit of a struggle and quite a bit of navigation involved in this. And yes, definitely, again, depending on the latitude of research that we want to do, how we want to pursue our research, what our basic idea of research is, will also inform our decision whether we want to go through this training of PhD or we straight away want to contribute to some other policy institutions in a different way, because both the ideas of research are quite considerably different. There's significant amount of difference in the very protocols and the manifestations of those researchers. So we have to be particularly informed about our decision, why we are choosing what we are choosing actually. Now, Hika, because you applied from India, isn't it? And Wasim is more of an insider perspective of applying, being a British Kashmiri and applying from within the UK. For you, if I may ask you, for our students, how much time does it take to apply and what are all steps for outsiders? I mean, like people who are applying from other countries into the UK, what are the different kind of steps that are involved in this preparation for application to the PhD?
Yeah, so I think my response is specifically for, so I mean, I would first caveat my responses by saying that I'm mostly speaking to social sciences and humanities, and I'm speaking to the UK process. I think that if you have not had, if you're applying to the UK as an outside, in the sense that you've not had exposure to that system previously, if you don't have a master's degree from a UK university, then I would say that it takes a good application, and one particularly if you're looking for funding, takes about a year. Now, if you are to the listeners, if you are applying right now and you're chasing the January-December deadline and you haven't spent a year, please do not panic. But I'm trying to give an overall sense of what it takes, and the reason why I say that with funding in mind is thinking about the different pieces that go into the application. So you need to identify a department And I think this is more thought needs to be put into this than what we typically have time for. And I completely understand the constraints within which, when you're finishing up your master's and you're applying, what all the constraints that you face. But a little more time needs to be spent on the kind of department that you want to be at, because that is going to be your intellectual home for 3 to 4 years. So thinking through that is quite important. It also takes time to find a supervisor, and that again I think is an important process that requires a bit of time, and it requires a certain level of relationship building before you apply. Particularly if you're looking for funding, because there are a lot of funding opportunities that one can access if one has been in contact with a particular academic. And I'm happy to elaborate on that later if required. The other piece is writing a research proposal itself, which takes that takes a bit of time, and done well. So it can lead to funding, particularly if you have had the time to develop that proposal in conversation with a prospective supervisor. Then you also need to gather references. That again takes a bit of time. So thinking about all these different pieces that requires that for which you need to, particularly if you need to apply for funding, these are the different pieces that have their own course. I think what requires time is having those conversations with, making those first contact with supervisors, potential supervisors, having a particular, perhaps an introductory phone call, getting some information on what possible funding sources exist within the university, and trying to find a research proposal that fits within the remit of the supervisor's work, is what one should focus on, and that takes about a year. Particularly if you don't have a connection, or if you've not done a master's in the UK, and you have not necessarily had the opportunity to have those discussions with certain departments. But again, I don't want to be too prescriptive about the fact that that one needs a year. But that is the amount of time that one should spend if you want to think about building a research trajectory that's going to converse with another academic's work in the department. And in the UK, a lot of funding announcements are made throughout the course of the summer, but also early autumn, so in August and September. And the deadlines usually are December to January. So if you're thinking about December to January, starting early on in the summer or spring around April is certainly, that makes for a slightly more robust application. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Mahika. I mean, it's quite informative, and thanks a lot for summing it all up together. And I guess one important aspect of it is because as I said in the beginning as well, that this is a very rigorous kind of a journey, so we have to be ready for it, whoever is planning to get into the PhD. The other element that often goes sort of unnoticed, but becomes more pronounced as you go into the journey, is your engagement with the topic that you're choosing for yourself. So it's a very important mix of looking at the potential supervisors, the potential topic, and also your interests. Because thinking about being onto a project for 3, 4, 4.5, 5 years, and also it's defining or sort of informing your larger trajectory afterwards. So if you're not in love, or you don't have this particular proclivity towards this topic, it would be very boring, looking at one document, one topic, each and every day for weeks, months, and years altogether. That becomes quite taxing and traumatic, unless and until you don't sort of have that proclivity or belief, or it's not that kind of a personal kind of a project. Otherwise, it becomes very taxing, in my opinion. That's another thing that I would be if I were a student, or even when I was a student, when I made the choice, this was particularly at the back of my mind, that what kind of a topic that is it that I'm choosing. So Wasim, I'd like to build up, I'd like to ask you to build upon what Mahika said from the perspective, being within the UK and applying to a UK university. What was the kind of preparation that you did in terms of a research proposal, having an SOP ready, having a CV ready? How long did it take you, and what all did you do for that preparation?
Okay, so this is going to be said with the qualification that this was a long time ago, and application processes were a lot simpler then. It took me from the last few months of a master's program from, say, June till September to put together a proposal, which is not very long. But I also work in a sort of specific field of research within historical research. So the first thing to say then is to think about the content of your master's qualification, right? The research you've already done hitherto, and think if there are things that you're interested in developing or furthering that you've already looked at, that you have the skills to do research in, right? You won't be able to put together a PhD proposal for an area completely unrelated to your existing field of study. So having made a decision about the rough sort of area or topic, that will shape where you might look at different universities to apply. So I work in the history of political ideas. I've just done a master's in the history of political ideas. And there were a certain number of theories or philosophies that I was interested in doing historical research into. So I looked for departments with academics in who were interested in those things as well. And once I did that, I was able to identify a few people who I emailed over a summer saying, these are my preliminary research ideas. Would you be interested in this kind of topic? And one person was particularly interested. So I applied to do it with them, and I received support from them and advice with the research proposal. But I've missed a step here, which is that you need to come up with a research proposal around the same time as you're thinking about what subject and subfield to apply for, right? And I think that's you could do a whole panel discussion just around coming up with a research proposal. And I think Tausif actually, Zia has already done a session on defining a research question. And a research question is not quite the same as your proposal or your statement of purpose, but it is fundamental to that, right? So just briefly in summary, the point of coming up with a research question, which should be one of the first things you start working on, is that you come up with an idea or a hypothesis or a particular set of questions, doesn't have to be just one, that you want to answer or investigate with your research. And the shape of those questions will determine the kinds of evidence you would be gathering during your PhD and the kind of arguments or stories you would be telling with your research, right? And when you do that, you will have to read widely in the literature, right? So you need to start reading in the kinds of areas you're interested in writing about, potentially for a PhD very soon. And when you're doing that, you want to come up with some fundamental questions you want to answer with your research. And that will be the basis of your research proposal. At the same time, you should be thinking about which departments, as Mahika said, which departments and which universities you're interested in applying to. You won't be able to apply to dozens, right? It's just too time consuming. You do want to apply to multiple places and to multiple scholarships, but you're not going to be able to do it for many. So if you have a set of research ideas, not quite a proposal, you can then approach academics in these particular departments and ask them if they're interested or they would be interested in supervising a project like this. And then they should ideally be able to give you time to offer advice or comments on your proposal, right? I think it's probably a bad sign if a professor says, yes, I'm interested in supervising this, and then gives you no help at all, right? But at the same time, you want to recognize that academics, especially in the UK, are often very pushed for time. They have very little time. But at the same time, don't see yourself just as you're not going begging, right? It's good for academics to have PhD students as well, right? You're not doing them, they're not doing you just a pure favor, if you know what I mean. So you shouldn't be too nervous or sort of subservient about this, but just be aware that there are limits on their time and that you do want their help in formulating a research proposal and getting through the application process. I think I'll stop there because some of the other things I could talk about will come up in other questions.
Yeah, totally. I mean, like, I would be building up on these questions, especially around the research question and the research proposal in the coming questions to you. And I guess I absolutely agree with you what you said, that it's a kind of a navigation where you're juggling and balancing so many things at the same time. It's a lot of thinking that you're doing about your research proposal, about your research questions and other things, and also simultaneously, like, liaising with the university, searching or hunting for the supervisors, getting your referees ready, having the CV quite ready, having an SOP. So many things happening at the same time. So it needs complete like space. You can't be doing a job and simultaneously like thinking that you'd seriously apply for a PhD, because it would need some sort of dedication when you're actually planning to do it, and some commitment on your end where you in my opinion, are primarily focusing on this. With regard to what you said regarding the supervisors, Mika, I mean, like choosing the supervisors is quite a bit of a task, like looking who you want to work with, and then sort of like liaising with them and making them interested in your work. And like, how was the journey? I mean, what would you tell the students who are planning to apply from Kashmir about choosing the supervisors, how to go about it? How do you look for a supervisor? Like, what are the basic criteria of choosing a supervisor? When and how does one approach them? And how do we take things further on from there?
Yeah, I think this sort of it naturally flows from Wasim's response to how to think about a research question and how to place that within a particular discipline, or if you're thinking more in terms of interdisciplinary research, thinking about what kind of a department would be suitable for that. So one is, so if you are thinking about a PhD application, and if you're already thinking about a research question, you're at that stage where you have obviously explored a topic with some degree of interest. So you probably are reading other people's work around that. So one way to think about the research to identify people is to think about, if you're interested in a particular research question, you can think about it. Particularly at this stage, you start with an issue that you're interested in, and within that issue, it could be framed. So, say you're interested in the climate crisis and migration, you could approach that from an anthropological perspective. You could approach that from a political science perspective. You could approach that from a more interdisciplinary perspective, where you're interested in looking at slightly environmental science issues, but also looking at the political economy of some of these climate policies that require. So I think thinking about a department where there are people who are working using that particular disciplinary lens is important. Now, this process today is slightly complicated by how interdisciplinary a lot of the departments in the UK have become. So, a topic like that, for example, could very much could find a great home in the Department of Politics, but it could equally find a great home in a Department of Area Studies. So, how thinking about where you want to locate this particular research proposal and with whom requires looking through the department websites a little bit, trying to see, trying to identify people who work on this particular topic, and trying to identify how they approach this particular question. So I would recommend looking at the scholars that you're interested in, going to their websites and trying to see what kind of work they have published and what kind of journals they have published, if those are the conversations that you are interested in. And I understand that at this stage you don't know the nitty-gritties of how these journals work and what these different, necessarily the kind of the politics behind the knowledge that is produced around a topic. But I think what needs to what it's, some of it is a hunch, and to see if what the person is writing, what they write in the popular press, if that hits a chord with you. So looking for supervisor and reading their work is quite key. And I say this because very often, I mean, I will find I will get emails that say that I'm really interested in your work, where actually they clearly have not read what I've written, because the question is, and I completely understand that time is limited. It's the institution that students are particularly interested in, not particularly the person. I think identifying a good supervisor requires a little bit of investment in reading what they have written. And as Wasim said, that people are busy, and they will but that should not stop you from asking for help and engaging with them, because if your research interest is linked to the kind of work that supervisors or academics do, then they will be interested in supervising and they will be interested in engaging with their question. So if your research question is precise, if your topic is precise, great. If it's not, if you're broadly interested in a particular issue, to strike out a conversation and to begin the process of liaising can happen if you evince an interest in a particular topic and that topic is connected to that person's work. And linked to this, I mean, I would say that don't be shy in writing to people and writing, and proposing and then just sharing your proposal. But when one writes, I think it's very useful if there is a proposal attached or certain ideas attached, because it's no point having conversations in the abstract, particularly when time is so limited. I've lost my train of thought, but I was going to say something about looking at supervisors specifically. Yeah, just to contact them with a particular question and to make sure that the question resonates with their work. So putting some effort into looking into what it is that people research. So yeah, if my thought comes back, I will pitch in. Thanks.
Thank you, Mahika. Yeah, we'll wait for that thought to come back. But then, yeah, a brilliant piece of advice, which is really important, and I quite agree with you. The significance of approaching the supervisors, but also being very aware of their work and actually pronouncing it. They should realize that they know your work. That reminds me of when I started applying for the PhD admissions. The supervisor that I was most interested with was the one who ultimately ended up supervising me. And the trick was that when I first submitted, as you rightly said, a rough draft of my research proposal, what I wanted to do, though that changed considerably, that went into smithereens. I mean, it evolved to something entirely different. But then the thing was that I made sure that I read my supervisor's work and I cited the supervisor a couple of times in my work in the literature review, and also whilst identifying the gaps and how I was planning to approach that thing. So methodologically, as well as in terms of the debates, I was sort of engaging with the supervisor. That helped me sort of connect with the supervisor. And I guess the trick here is if you're able to convince or liaise with the supervisors properly, and if they know that you've already engaged with their work, you know your work properly, and you know where you're going, I think quite a bit of help comes from the supervisors as well. At least one of the supervisors, if they're on your side, they help you identify the second supervisor. Usually that's what happens in the UK. You need to have two supervisors. And also they help you through this larger navigation of looking for fundings within the university, within the department, and also helping you get outside fundings. So that forms a very important part of the process. Finding the supervisors is actually one of the foundations, which is quite ineluctable to you in terms of doing a PhD application, because they play a very key role. And the way you connect to the supervisors, which is evidencing that you know their work and your work is related to them, which may be one of the ways of doing it is citing them, referring them properly in your work, not for the heck of it, but then actually quite organically showing how their work relates to it. That becomes a very, very significant element which many of the students would consider doing. Wasim, I want to build up on what you were saying. Generally, when we have queries from students from Kashmir, they one of the things that comes through is that they're quite passionate about doing a PhD, but what they have is a very broad area that maybe I want to contribute to this, or I want to do research in this thing. Okay, the idea of what you said, having a research question, is not really clear. It's not even in there. Even if you have a research proposal, you can't sift out if there is a question that they're trying, or a puzzle that they're trying to pursue. However, they have a larger idea that they produce generally. So how do the students go about this? Developing a research question, the need for developing a research question from this larger idea that you have, to actually narrow down your research and show that it's ambitious and doable at the same time.
Okay, thank you. I think the first thing I'll do is share the link to Artazia's talk on research questions for Penned Online. But that's quite a long, detailed talk, and I think I can give a sort of short, my view of why a research question matters and how you go about doing it. Well, as I said before, the point of the research question is to sort of direct your research and sort of indicate what the purpose of it is, right? What the specific gap in existing knowledge or literature it's going to address is, and how it's going to address it, right? So, for example, if you're interested in I don't know, gender and mental health in a particular conflict zone, e.g., Kashmir or something, you can't have a research proposal that just talks about the existing literature and how interesting it is and how this is an important area of study, and you're going to look at some aspects of the gendered experience of sort of access to mental health services or something like that. You need to have a specific set of questions that would say, how is access to these services experienced by these particular groups, right? I say particular groups because you also want to narrow down the sort of evidence base or the groups of people or phenomena you're looking at. So the first thing to do if you want to come up with this kind of question is, as Mahika said, is to read widely in the area you're looking at, right? And I think the impression I've got from advising Kashmiri students is many Kashmiri students do that already, right? As you said, everyone's passionate about their research. They will do lots of reading. They will know lots of stuff, right? The step that comes after that is to think about where the gaps or most interesting areas of our existing knowledge and the existing literature are, right? Where you don't want to look at a complete research project about which you have nothing additional to say and say, I want to just add to that, right? There will be many areas of research in the areas you're interested in that will sort of point in the direction of future or further research, right? And what you can do, or what you should try and do, is think about how you could contribute to that area, or you could fill a gap, right? So these questions, no one assessing your application will expect these questions to be the final product, right? They're the beginning of a research process, right? So this isn't, you don't have to have all the answers and all the questions ready. You just need to have some way of conveying to other people and to yourself exactly where you're going to start looking when you do your PhD for your research, exactly what bodies of knowledge you'll draw upon, what evidence you're going to start gathering, right? So your research questions may change in the process of your research and writing. Briefly then, to summarize, there are a few ways of thinking about what these research questions should be. They should be appropriate in scope. They shouldn't ask questions so huge and general that the project could go on forever, right? You're completing a PhD in 3 to 4 years, right? So it needs to be focused or narrow enough to fit into 3 to 4 years of research. You might want to look at other people's PhDs, right? If you can get online access to PhDs that have been cited in papers you like. You also want to think about whether you can find enough documents, statistics, persons, data to provide the information to develop your hypotheses, right? One problem is that people might, want to show things or prove things or indicate things through their research that might seem obvious when you think about it, but are actually very hard to support ethically or viably through evidence, right? I mean, I'll take one example of someone wanting to work on the sort of self-conception of bureaucrats in the Kashmir administrative service, right? This is a really important area of research, but this person also had to think about when they can get access to the people, the persons, and whether they would want to talk about the things that would help them complete their research safely, for example. And then finally, I should have mentioned this at the start. It has to be a research question you're interested in, right? You don't want to produce a research proposal that's just based on what you think people in a department or your supervisor would want. Because if you're going to go through this stressful process, it should be something, as we've said, that you feel strongly or passionate about. I'll leave it there. And I think it'd be good to hear from Mahiko. I think I'm sure we'll have thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Before I come on to this, thank you very much, Wasim, about the importance or centrality of a research question, because research question becomes quite pivotal in sort of like depicting how ambitious and how doable the particular project is and where it is going actually, apart from laying down the first initial bits of steps for the pursuants or the researchers themselves. So it becomes quite important for both the ways, the one who's looking at the research proposal as well as one who's proposing the research proposal. So it becomes very important, and research question in that way is quite central. And there are many considerations that need to be taken or borne in your mind about going about the research questions, how you frame it, what are the different aspects that you have to keep in mind. So we have a detailed session, as Wasim very rightly said, done by Atharzia. So we actually live streamed it last week. We replugged it rather, shared the link because Wasim, the link you shared it went to the chat, not in the comments. So I reshared the same thing. So you can look at it in the comments and you can watch it. It's a detailed session, rather a workshop on having or developing research questions and the significance of research questions. And before coming to Mihika, we have a comment by Adil Munzoor asking, is there any concept of a part-time or a distance mode PhD program in the UK, or is it full-time only? So Mihika, this is a question that I'd like you to build on, and also your take on having a research question. And then I want to ask you both about the CV, but first let's take these two questions briefly, and then let's come on to the aspect of the CV afterwards. There you go.
Okay, so I just want to just quickly add on to my previous answer, and also links to what Shaheen put as a question, which was, what stands out in a research proposal or in an application. I think that was more her question. I actually think that, so I echo everything that Wasim has said about a research question and framing a solid proposal. So I don't want to repeat, but I think the only thing that I was going to say that, when you initiate contact, one of the things that excites me is getting a sense of that passion, or and sometimes that's particularly if the passion comes from a particular work experience, or having had done a particular past project through your master's program, even if it is short and was just limited to the summer, but a concrete piece of work that has generated an interest in the topic is something that really excites. It should be built into the research proposal, and it should be flagged to the supervisor, because then you are again having a conversation that shows that the project is feasible, because you have some understanding of the ground realities and the empirical realities of the topic that you're interested in. So that's the only thing that I would add. And Shahid, I just think that to me it stands out in an application, and I find that very exciting. Your question about part-time PhD, actually the University of Bath has part-time PhDs, and I think IDS Sussex and some other development studies institutes also have part-time PhDs. Now, I don't think there is a blanket answer for that in terms of the UK as a whole. I think it depends on the department and the program. So there are certain departments that will have certain programs that have part-time PhDs. So it's a very program-specific question. Again, these are questions that can be answered if you contacted someone who was in that field, in that department, who could possibly be a potential supervisor, and ask these questions. So the University of Bath has a part-time PhD for international development, which takes slightly longer, but you can, and has a very limited residential requirement. So the time that you spend in the UK is limited. And of course, it's less expensive than a full-time PhD as well. And it can be juggled alongside work, or even care work. Okay, so I think those were the two questions. Tausif, did you want me to carry on into the CV question that you asked, or?
I wanted to first come on to that because there's a context to that, and afterwards we'll take the question posed by Incha, which is very important but quite relevant to the next question that I'll be posing. The thing is that, I also lost my train of thoughts, but about the distance PhD, the distance PhD is a very important thing that we need to consider. That I agree with you that there are different departmental regulations that vary from department to department and from university to university. But there's one thing that I've seen that maybe there is this interchangeability from a regular PhD to a distance mode PhD. I've seen quite a few of my colleagues do it, that they they do a regular or join as regular PhDs, they intercalate for some time and they change distance mode because they want to do some kind of work here. But then for outsiders, for instance, our Kosher students, they wouldn't be able to do it. If they're intercalating, they have to go back to Kashmir because of the visa regulations that they have. Also, if they're converting into distance mode PhD, they wouldn't be able to stay in the UK because their visa regulation would change and they have to go back to Kashmir. So even if you wish to do a distance mode PhD, then I mean, like, you wouldn't be able to stay here on a tier 4 visa until and unless you have an ILR or something. So this is a very tactical and technical kind of a situation which the students need to be very aware of. And we are very thankful to Dr. Shaheen Baji for her questions. Thank you so very much. So about the CVs, and that's where the question of Insha also comes up. From like, Vasim, you'd agree with me because we've also thankful to Shaheen Baji for bringing such students to us, that the students were actually like desirous of pursuing higher educations in the UK or the Europe. And we've seen quite some examples in the last few years through Atwas UK. The students are so meritorious and they've done so much apart from their studies. They have so much in their CV. But the problem is, how do you present it? The CV is something which becomes really significant of creating an impression on the university, because the universities are also very interested in investing in students or taking students who bring so much to them. So how important does the CV become for the students to represent or like sell their potentialities? And how is it different from a normal CV that we usually see? We've got quite some templates on the internet and all. We just write out the name, a small bio, and put in these things. Does there need to be a different orientation or interface of the CV that we're preparing for the PhD? And linked to that is one important question, because in CV, what highlights in an academic CV is your publication. For joining a PhD, as Insha asks us, is it really important, or like, is it very, very essential to have some kind of publication in your CV? To both of you, I mean. You're on mute, Mihika. We start with you and we go to Vasim afterwards.
Okay, all right. Okay, I think the CV for an academic position, so for a research position, for a PhD application, it's one aspect of the entire proposal. So it's not that the CV, no single part is. No single part sort of speaks about the candidate on its own right. I mean, I think it's just an entire package that the doctoral commission or the PhD committee looks at. So without sort of overemphasizing the significance of any one particular piece, I would say that the CV is important because it demonstrates what the candidate is beyond that research question and beyond that research proposal. So in that sense, I find that that the CV can be quite interesting in highlighting the overall research personality and persona of the person, who you are. And the CV is slightly different from other job CVs in the sense that you prioritize and you frame your experiences in certain ways. But it's not that different from any other job CV in the sense that, for every job you tailor your experiences, what you want to highlight, what you want to foreground based on what the job requires. So similarly, for a PhD application, your CV should speak about your qualifications. So what your degrees are. I think it's quite important to highlight specifics of your training. So relevant coursework is an important aspect of highlighting that you have a certain amount of training and that has set you in a particular trajectory that will work well with the department that you are seeking to be at. So I think relevant coursework, I would say, is an important aspect of the CV. And then, of course, research experience. Now, research experience can be broken down into different components. So it can be sort of assignments that you have done for your master's coursework. So highlight those assignments, what the question was that you answered, what disciplines or what literatures you engage with in that, just in a simple sentence. So obviously you're at the master's level. It's not expected that you're going to have a whole lot of publications, a whole lot of research experience, but from the output that you have produced, from within your master's and anything outside of that. So whether it is a research internship, whether it is a work internship, if you're working for an NGO, a civil society organization, if you were working, in the extremely fraught issues and situations in your region, talk about those experiences and think about the possible policy, political, and research implications that work has had. So, that's another way of dressing your experiences as relevant experience. So I would say qualification, relevant coursework, your research experience from either assignments, the dissertation that you might have written for your master's. If you have research output in terms of publication, even if it is for the popular press, even if it's for media, do put that under your media engagement, your public engagement. Link your articles, link podcasts if you have done, or any sort of other work. I think any sort of work that you have done as within the university in a student organization that also speaks to civic engagement largely is important in CVs, and it just goes to show that the person and the engagements that you value. So those are the important things that I would say go into a CV.
And your inputs on this, the importance of the CV and the way you sort of like manifest it. So your inputs, Wasim?
Yeah, I don't have much to add actually, except to say that most academics will understand that between masters and PhD application time, there's very little opportunity to publish, right? Research. And the other thing is that the sort of research that they might hope you would publish at the end of the PhD, towards the end or just after the PhD, would be in journals with peer review processes, right, where work is checked. And it would be ridiculous for people to expect you to have published that kind of work before applying for a PhD. So don't feel worried about that, right? However, if you have written things that you've managed to get published in online magazines, that type of thing, then they should go in, but you shouldn't worry if you haven't got something like that already. Like Mahika said, the main thing is to show that you are capable of doing research, and the main place you will have exhibited those skills is on your master's program and in, say, a dissertation for your BA, right? So it's useful to put, the title of your research papers for your program, the marks you received, if they're good, though those should be on your grade transcripts. Anyway, your academic CV should also be structured differently from a conventional CV. So it should put your education right at the top before everything else. I mean, you would do that in a normal CV. Anyway, any job experience, should be right at the bottom, or perhaps not even mentioned. I don't have much to add beyond what Mahika said. I mean, one other thing to note is often application processes will not ask you to submit a CV document, right? They will ask you to put the text from that you might put in a CV into text boxes, right? Which means you might not even have the opportunity to structure or organize your academic CV yourself. So that makes some of these questions kind of irrelevant in a way, because they're extracting the data they want from you. But yeah, don't have anything else to add.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, like the way AI is functioning right now in the application, even in the job market, is that they're sort of sifting this information from you and structuring it by default. So AI is taking everything in. And about the CV, I think it's really important. I mean, like apart from merit, I guess the universities want to invest and have students who don't become a liability or who are not bookworms. They want to see versatile, as Wasim said, and building on Mahika, showing that these people come with capabilities and they're bringing some add-ons to the university. That's what universities are interested, or departments are interested into. And if I talk about Kashmiri students, I mean, like, honestly, the amount of engagement that we've seen, I mean, Wasim is a witness to that. and our people in the UK who are, especially Atwas UK, who are helping students come here for like admissions and other things. I think the amount of engagement they have is commendable, so meritorious, but at the same time, civil society activity, journalism, writing articles in the newspapers, doing some kind of social work. So the only thing for them is how do you sell it in terms of like, if I put it in a very crude way, how does your CV tell the university that you're not taking a bookworm, but you're taking a very versatile, capable person who can bring so much into your university in terms of activities other than just research. It's not just research. You have so many other means of disseminating this knowledge. You have so many means of what Mahika said, public engagement. And I guess like 80% of the students that I engage with, they are so phenomenal and so meritorious. So like our Kashmiri students, like you guys have the capabilities. And if I may say, kosher, تۄہہِ سورُے کینٛہہ آسان یوٗتاہ چھُ سانیو کٲشرو بَچو میرِٹ آسان حٲصِل کوٚرمُت چاہے تِمو ؤنِو تُہۍ بِیانٛڈ سکوٗل یا بِیانٛڈ کالج یا یونیورسٹی تِمو کوٚرمُت چھُ آسان چاہے سُہ سِوِل سوسایٹی ؤرک چھےٚ تِمن آسان different NGO ؤرک چھےٚ آسان اخبارن منٛز چھےٚ تِمو آسان لیکھمُت. That's what the university is actually looking for. Because at this master's or your undergrad level or planning for the PhD, you can only do so much because you're busy with your studies and other things, but showing that you've been able to balance other things. It doesn't mean that you need to have Q1, Q2, Q3 journal publications and other things. No, not at all. But showing that you're capable of doing these things, you've already taken baby steps for that, is something that the universities would be most interested in and looking for. And that brings us to another point for today. Along with the CV, what's also very important is what usually the academics, in my opinion, look at first is the SOP once you start the formal application process into the PhD. Mahika, what are your opinions about how important this CV this SOP becomes in this application process, and what all should it reflect about a student? How does one go about this development of this SOP? Yeah, SOP.
So I think the statement of purpose is quite important, and it's a significant, document. And so I should qualify that when I'm thinking of statement of purpose, and this is usually the institutions that I have engaged with, the statement of purpose is also the one that that speaks about your research ideas and your research proposal. So, I'm looking at the statement of purpose as the document, the primary document that will highlight your research proposal, but one that builds a narrative of, how you came about this research, what this research project is, and what it is that you're trying to get out of this PhD. So it's thinking about I think of it as your story, as your research story that you want to put in there. So I think it's terribly exciting when the research question comes from a particular prior piece of work, and by that I don't necessarily mean that it has to be the master's dissertation. It could be the master's dissertation. It could be one particular course in your master's program that really piqued your interest in that topic, and that's what you want to further explore because it's also relevant to your context, to your interests in general. But it could also be a particular experience that you have had while working with civil society organization, writing a newspaper article, and the research that went behind it that triggered your interest in this particular topic. Then you talk about your research proposal in a comprehensive way. I think what most committees are looking for is that the question has the potential to produce an academically rigorous piece of work, that there is someone in the department who is going to be able to supervise that particular question, and typically that person hopefully is also going to endorse your research proposal, and that your research proposal is feasible. So it's feasible because it is ethically viable, but it is also something that you can finish within 3 to 4 years. So I think feasibility is a key part of your research proposal. And then ending with a sense of, so the research committee wants, or the admissions committee wants to know that you have a sense of what the department can offer. So, so showing knowledge of, and showing your understanding of what you think the department is, why you are applying for the department, why it is a good fit for you, is an important part of the statement of the statement of purpose. So indicating that perhaps it is the fact that it is an interdisciplinary department, and while you might be focused on particular issues in Kashmir and you have a supervisor who has expertise in the topic, you want to be able to speak to, say, conflict and migration in general, and the department has a vibrant research cluster or a bunch of people who are looking at similar sort of issues in different parts of the world. So that could be a motivation. So giving a sense of why you chose that department is important in the statement of purpose, and then rounding it up with some indication of what it is that perhaps you are hoping to get out of the PhD. You don't have to know, you don't have to stick to it. So it's not that it has to be a final statement. No one's going to hold you to it after you finish your PhD. In fact, your research question is also probably going to change within the course of the first couple of years of your PhD. But it is to show that you have the capability of doing a viable, interesting piece of rigorous work, and that you can write. So these are the things that you need to demonstrate from the statement of purpose. So writing concisely, being to the point, but also showing that you know what goes into into making a comprehensive piece of argument, is what I think what you primarily need to demonstrate, without necessarily having hashed out all the nitty-gritties of how you will do the research. So yeah, Wasim, over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Wasim, before you come in, I have another bit to add. I think you sum it all up, Mihika, in the sense that you have to show this ability that you can write. And SOP is one of the things that I've seen our students struggle with the most. I think Wasim would agree with me. And it's sort of like evidencing that you can write in 500 or 550 words. You're summing it all up. Number one, your story. Number second, why you're choosing the university. Number third, why should the university choose you? These, I guess, in the SOP, these are the three things, from my opinion, that ought to be taken into consideration. What are your thoughts, Wasim?
Oh, I forgot to mute myself. Sorry. Yeah, I don't have much to add except on one specific, Kershaw-specific matter, which is that some PhD applicants, I've advised, have in their SOPs written very eloquently, passionately, and very personally about the sort of struggles they've had during their childhood and teenhood under state oppression, etc., etc., and how that has interrupted their education at many points, right? Initially, I was skeptical about this and thought, this might worry the university applying. But gradually, and this candidate was successful, gradually, I think there is a way and there is a rationale for pointing out that very briefly and concisely, and not in an over the top manner, that there have been certain challenges in your education environment that you've come through with a passion for research, with these research skills. And then the bulk of the SOP should be exactly as Mihika described it. It should be about why this department, what you hope to get from this. But I also think there's nothing wrong, and in fact, it's fair to mention that your education may have been interrupted. At times you have a passion for research and you want to go somewhere where there's a stable environment for that research to be carried out. The comparison I'd make is when we do admissions for undergraduates to UK universities, we do take into account background factors, right? Now, these background factors are completely different, right? It normally just means they're students from less privileged backgrounds who didn't go to expensive schools, and therefore their outcomes and their results when they apply might not be as high as they could have been if they'd had all these privileges. Now, of course, none of this will make up for poor BA or MA results, right? But it is background information that indicates that you have faced challenges and you've come through them. And that's part of why you're applying to a department that can help you flourish. So that's one thing to think about putting in. But the important thing is not to overdo that, right? And to do all the other things that Mihika said, because those are more fundamental.
I absolutely agree with you. I think seeing the kosher specific context that you gave to it is really important, because that's your story. and that's quite important. But at the same time, making sure what you say, that there has to be a balance between your story and playing a victim card, because at the end of the day, you'll get through this process on the basis of your merit rather than playing the victim. But then understanding that nuance between your story of like showing them your capability of how in these very uncertain and precarious circumstances you still manage to get through and sail through and are able to apply, and showing them that you're meritorious despite these untoward sort of circumstances, which becomes really important part of a CV and the SOP. Wasim, another thing that I wanted to ask you was about having referees. How does one go about this process? How do the kosher students sort of like choose their referees? Because that becomes another very important element in this PhD application process. You have this research proposal with a very sharp kind of a research question or a couple of sub questions. Then you have an SOP that is ready. You have a CV which shows or reflects your capabilities. But at the same time, you're also required to have referees, at least two, if I'm not wrong. So yeah, how does one go about it? Who do I choose as a referee when I'm applying for a PhD?
Okay, so some of the basics. The most recent university degree you've done, you will want a referee from that. So if you have done an MA, you should try and get someone who taught you on the MA. If you can't, it's not the end of the world. But those two referees should both be academics, right? They should be at a university institution, ideally. Okay. The second thing to say is they don't have to speak about your research proposal in their reference, right? Or they should gesture to it. They should say, you know, and I hear, ideally they would say, oh, and I understand this is the research they're interested in doing. I think this fits very well with their background. But their job is not to provide an assessment of your future research. It's to assess what they saw of your academic achievement when you were at their institution, and ideally when they taught you. So you should pick or ask people who you think you had a rapport with, for whose courses you did very well. So if you received very high marks in one particular module, then perhaps seek out that person for reference. You should ideally give the referee a sense of what you're applying to do research in, right? So they know why you're writing in the first place. You should ask them fairly early on in the process. Don't write to people and say, I need a reference in 2 weeks, please, right? Because academics will often be getting multiple requests for this, and sometimes they might say, I don't have time. The problem I have to say I've found with that I've seen Kashmiri students experience is sometimes that referees from Kashmiri institutions have failed to submit references in time. Now, that's not necessarily a sloppiness issue. That the issues with the interruption of internet and communications access and so on occasionally, not for security reasons, but power cuts and so on. So you should really make contact early, as soon as you have some research ideas in place. Give a clear sense to the referee of when the references would be due, right? Give them lots of advance warning. And you should pick academics and academics who are most likely to have a high opinion of you. That would be the most basic advice I can give. Mahika, I'm sure Mahika can add to that.
Go ahead, Mahika.
I don't have much to add except to say that I agree with Wasim, and I think it's important to have references that speak to your abilities closely. So it's important that you choose referees who are in a position to comment about your capabilities as a student, as a scholar, as a researcher, rather than trying to get someone who is perhaps high profile but has had limited interaction with you. So because it's easy to pick that out in references when the interaction is not necessarily close. But no, I mean, I think Tausif and Wasim are more they know the context well, and they're just I was just quite struck when Wasim, you mentioned about the possibility of references not reaching on time. I don't know if what you think about this, but I was going to say that if that happens, perhaps it is if if your referee says that they were not able to submit the application on time for because of an internet outage, which is entirely possible, perhaps it would be useful to write to either the academic administrator in the department or write to the person who has agreed to supervise, because I mean, if such an information came to, I'm sure, one of us who is looking at a possible potential candidate, we would rush to the administration that handles the PhD process to say that, look, there is a problem, and so to see if there can be a concession that can be made for a late submission. So I would guess that one should not hesitate to contact in such situations. But I leave this to your expertise, Wasim and Tosif.
Thank you, Mahika. I think you're absolutely right. And I've seen this case shape in both the ways. I mean, like, much of the load of not being able to present or have these letter of references in time, much of the load actually shifts to the supervisors who have now undertaken to supervise the student, the way they process it with the bureaucracy in the university. I've seen, like, Kashmiri students, one of the students got the admission, and it was at a time when like 5th of August thing happened, and they weren't able to do their documentation and other things properly. But then the supervisors could actually plead the case with the department, and they got extensions which were quite genuine. But at the same time, there was another thing also, where a supervisor from Kashmir for a kosher student, they failed to provide the letter of reference, and the student's admission in UK was cancelled. Luckily, the student got admitted for a PhD course in the USA, if I remember properly. That's one. The other thing also that which sort of I would say is South Asia specific, that, like, providing this letter of reference is not a favor that the academics are doing to the students. It's a part of the duty. It's a part of the job. So you can't. I mean, there have been cases where, like, the things that I've come across is that it's taken more of a favor that an academic is doing on a student who they've supervised or taught or who've been schooled under them, which is again a problem for, like, not the students, but on the other end, where I think there needs to be a change of mentality. I guess, Mahika, we're actually running out of time, so we'll briefly try to run through the last bits of this. The thing that I want to ask you is, like, applying to UK from maybe South Asia, India, Kashmir, or like any other place in South Asia. Importance of these language tests, like, apart from the disagreement or the level of maybe violence that one can see in this, that they're still a part of the bureaucracy. How important is IELTS or TOEFL that we talk about in this PhD application process?
So, this depends on the department, the institution, whether you need the TOEFL, the test of English language, and or GRE. I think increasingly there are departments who don't require all of them, but I think it's quite it's department specific. So the important thing is to check the requirements firstly. I also recommend, because how expensive these tests are, and because we know all the problems with some of these tests, I would recommend also checking in with the administration and the bureaucracy of the application process to see if it can be waived, if your if your previous degree and if evidence of writing will help you qualify for a waiver. So I would check. But insofar as its weightage in the application process itself is concerned, I mean, I think it's not something that one weighs very strongly. It is part of the application process, and it would, if the scores were very low, it might raise a red flag. But outside of that, I mean, my experience, and Wasim and Tosif, you could tell me if I'm wrong, but my experience is that they don't particularly, the committee does not weigh in on that very seriously. So, if you've had trouble accessing these test centers and you've not been able to take this test, I would write to your potential supervisor and also write to the department to see if there's possibility of waiving these tests, because the credibility of these tests are going down as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you, Mahika. I mean, like, I absolutely do agree with it. And I mean, like, having to prove at PhD level that you know English in itself is quite, I mean, very, very problematic. And there have been some students who successfully actually challenged it and they've been able to do it. Unfortunately, I was never one of them. I did an IELTS test, which I regret. But yeah, it's needed to be done because it's part of the bureaucracy. Even if the university accepts you, the thing is, how does the immigration department that issues the visa in your favor? It's a requirement for them, if not for the university. The university, for instance, for me, I was exempt at the university, but then for the visa issuance, I needed to produce this IELTS letter. That's another technical bit that comes like that flags up there. Like even if it's not with the university, you can't challenge the government. It's very hard to change them and their stances. So that becomes another problem, isn't it? So Wasim, because you're very good with links and you've been very helpful in giving us these tips about different links about the visa, the PhD in distance, and again, I'm putting down your comments about the referees. Also, could you help the students with, are there any particular links or platforms that the students should look for with regard to like the PhD process or the fundings? Because it's not very easy to get a university or within the university, within the department funding. And so like 90% of the students have to usually depend on external funding sources. So is there a platform that's an aggregate of like all the funding opportunities that are available within the UK, outside of the UK?
Well, I think as the questions you sent to Mahika and I showed that suggested there's a huge amount of information out there on the internet. Findaphd.com, for example. Some of it's not completely up to date, but often what you can do is go to a big university's website or Google the name of the big UK university you're interested in and add PhD applications to the search, and you'll come across a page. You'll typically come across a page of the university setup guiding prospective candidates, and that information usually will be up to date. There's a whole other question about how funding in the UK works, right? So they're research bodies, national research organisations that provide groups of universities with funding for PhD scholarships. Those scholarships will cover the fees of international students, I think, and provide living costs, right? Maintenance costs. But only a certain percentage of, say, this body gives, I don't know, £1 million or whatever to London universities in a particular year for PhDs. A certain percentage of that funding will be available for international students, right? So what you'll want to do is think about the universities you're interested in applying for, and then Google them and add PhD applications and funding to the search, and you'll often get guidance about applying to a particular pot of funding. Say for London universities, there's a particular scheme, right? And it will have concrete advice and details of when the deadlines are for applying, which candidates they'll accept. Or, for example, in the middle of this sort of in Northern England, there are a few specific schemes. You'd look for those. But there's no one website really that covers it all. I mean, I'll put a few links in the chat box, but in some cases, you know, the advice on these websites is constantly changing. There's not one place that's better than everything else.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Thank you for that, Wasim. I think like findaphd.com is quite resourceful and enriching in that regard because it puts down many of these opportunities. But then at the same time, universities have these different sections where like they shortlist the kind of opportunities in terms of PhD fundings that are available for the students, that students from different countries, different regions, different faculties can avail for. So I think it's a part of the navigation that the students do of the university to be aware of what kind of funding opportunities are available to them. And I guess we've received a link from Misbah about jobs. So yeah, it's mainly about academic jobs that we have available in the UK, but definitely it has, time to time, it has these PhD opportunities, funded PhD opportunities that are also available. So our audiences, they can search for it in the comments. And at the same time, because we are running out of time, Mika, one question that I want to ask you that for the strong applications that get through, they are mainly, or like in most of the times, they are followed up by an interview. How do other students, inshallah, when they get through the process of this application successfully, like the applications are accepted and they go into this competition, what do they expect in this interview? What is this interview, and what all does this embellish or entail?
Yeah, so I think I will say that, if it's not the PhD committee itself, but very often the funding bodies or the funding agency might want an interview. And I think what they're looking for is, again, they're looking at promise. They're looking for promise, they're looking for potential, and they're looking for ability that you are going to be able to see through your project within the stipulated time of the funding, that you have thought through the practical aspects of research. So not only are they trying to, this is the funding body specifically will not just want to look at the fact that your question is interesting, that it is located within a particular discipline or a set of debates or a conversation. So you've thought through why this question is important. You have thought through the relevance of that question. So that's sort of the intellectual aspect that they want to look at in terms of the the research proposal per se. They also want to look at the kind of scholar that you are. So bringing up those other aspects that we discussed very much in the when we discussed the question on the CV. They want to look at the other aspects of your personality. So how you have engaged with media, or just your public engagement, other experiences. So bringing out that overall persona, I think, is something that is quite important. If there are other interests that you have, so perhaps you are interested in creative outputs of research that you produce, so that it is more accessible to the people that in the region that you want to work in. So highlighting some of these aspects of your research personality is key. And I think the third thing that they're looking for, which I started on.
Sorry, Mihika, we lost you. I think there's some issue.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the last piece that they want to look at is that that their project is feasible, and you have thought through the practical aspects of it. So as Wasim said, where will you get your data from? What are the ethical implications of this? And if you have a supervisor who's going to supervise. So.
Absolutely. And Wasim, if I may ask you about one important aspect, is that though we have successful applications from our kosher students, but many of our students do not make it in the first chance because the competition is quite a bit. So it's not possible that each one of the students that apply would get through. How does one deal with this rejection? Because this, it shouldn't discourage a person to stick on to the project and build on it and apply next year. Is there any particular thing that you'd like to tell those students if they don't get through this year? How do they take this rejection and then build on it further?
Well, yes. So I think the thing to remember is that UK funding for PhDs in the UK, or at least the level of competition for funding in the UK, used to be significantly less 10 to 15, 20 years ago, right? There are now many more people applying for PhDs because the job market is not great. So if you aren't successful for funding when you apply, do not take it personally. It's not a judgment of your personal qualities, a sign that your research would not be good. It's just a reflection of the difficulty of the PhD application situation. And the second thing is, you may have to treat it as a learning experience, right? You often have to make these applications with not much time if you're coming straight off a master's. But if you apply again the following year, you'll probably make connections, you'll probably gain more relevant experience that you can put on your CV, you'll be able to develop your research proposal, and you may have better luck. I think that's all I'd say. I mean, the academic job market after you finish a PhD is also like that, okay? So I guess on the one hand, some realism about what your chances of being successful in funding are, and on the second hand, if you don't get what you're after immediately, that really isn't a reflection, necessarily a reflection of your potential quality as a scholar. And you can just try again, right? And get more advice and develop your research proposal and try and get feedback as well, right? Especially from potential supervisors who may hear from the panel. From the panel might consist of their colleagues if it's a university-based process. They might hear from the panel, why your application maybe didn't proceed to the next round. So I had this happen with a PhD candidate applying with me, for example. I got feedback from colleagues on a panel that I then passed on to them, and now they're reapplying this year.
Absolutely agree with you. Mahika, would you like to add on to this?
No, just to say that rejections are not just, at the PhD level, it's just something that one has to grapple with through and through. So, no, I mean, I don't have much to add to Wasim. I think seeking feedback is key, and using that year between, your second round of application well, and by that I mean thinking through that feedback, carrying on liaising with your potential supervisor, so not dropping that ball while you're perhaps thinking about the next round of application, and perhaps using that time to write and taking on your interest outside of the PhD is a good use of that year that you're where you're waiting to apply again.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's really important. And I think you sum it all up. Is that like number one, the rejection is not a reflection of you, but it tells about like each and every department at the university have their particular interests, and it's not one particular official or a person who takes a call on which application goes through and which doesn't go through. It's actually a panel that sits and they have their interests, their priorities, and there is quite a bit of a fight. And I mean, you have to imagine that there are applications from all around the world, and there are only like about 10 or 12 sort of positions available in each department. So that like the possibilities are quite less. So it's not a reflection on your abilities. And as you very rightly say, is that like you have to follow it up, take a feedback and start working on that so that you're able to apply better the next year. And I've seen many such examples for the people who didn't get it in the first chance. They worked on it and got it through in the second chance, and it worked quite well. Even for students, like I think many students get admissions, they're admitted into the PhD, but they can't secure their fundings. So they delay their admission to the next year and apply better for other funding opportunities till they make it through. So there are many examples of that sort also. So I think it's a part of the process, so you have to be ready for it. The only thing is that just hang in there. That's what's needed. Don't lose faith, persistence of effort, a good plan of action, about maybe 6-7 months of preparation, and there are so many things that you're juggling at the same time simultaneously. That's, I think, the crux of what we discussed today. Is there anything that you'd like to add towards the end, Mahika, Wasim? Anything especially for our kosher students in Kashmir?
Well, I'll just end by saying that there is a lot of merit on this platform, all amongst those of you who are attending. So, the fact that you're attending this particular session shows that you are thinking about it. So, good luck, and my warmest wishes with you all. But yeah, not much more. That you have the merit, all the merit that one needs right here.
Yeah, I'd just echo what Mahika said, and I'd also say, especially if you're unsuccessful, for one round, reach out to British Kashmiris in academia, reach out to academics you think would be supportive, and also, support each other, right? Discuss your applications amongst each other, build a sense of community in Kashmir, because that will see you through a tough application process as well. And I just want to thank you, Tassi, for keeping this platform going and providing these kinds of talks for Kashmiri students who, as Mika said, the merit, the ability, and the potential there is astounding, and it would be brilliant to have more Kashmiris in higher education and doing research.
Absolutely, inshallah. Thank you so very much, Wasim and Mahika. And I absolutely agree with you. There is like tremendous amount of potential in Kashmir and amongst our Kosher students, and that's what keeps us going. I mean, like for the last 2.5 years, we've been running this platform and doing these sessions. It's only when we see the level of potential that our students have, the amount of interest and the amount of engagement that they do. The only thing is that like we need to stand together and help each other, and we're always there. I mean, like any British Kashmiris or like Atwas or Ben Online, we are there, please, and we'll be running these sessions, inshallah. Next week, we have a special session with Dr. Samina Raja, who is a professor at the University of Buffalo, about applying for PhD options or PhD admissions in the USA. It would be a detailed session. Inshallah, there'll be more sessions coming up. So please be with us. And if you've got any kind of queries or any kind of questions or want to discuss your proposals, so please feel free to email us. You have our email IDs that are linked on the Facebook page. And we've been replugging the sessions and these workshops that we've done about academic writing, theoretical framework, literature review, methodologies, research questions, having a research proposal. So each and every bit of information is already available. We are trying to redo those things, and we'll keep on adding literature and links to those. And please feel free to contact us anytime. And if we can be of any help, please let us know. And coming back to kosher, the inshallah उम्मीद है इन वाले हफ्ते में जुड़ो तो ऐसे they are some live sessions यथ कम जन में वोन कि इन वाले हफ्ते आसन ज़ोर तथ में जो सिर्फ सोन focus inshallah PhD use process जो सान student न so easy बनावे अगर कहाँ ते सवाल तो हम च या कहाँ ते query च this admission related please ऐसे क्यों या message या email करो ऐसे तो इंशाल्लाह इसको रोहतुल इम्कान कोशिश करें मस्बत जवाब तक पेटन देने तो बेग बार कार्य लेसियम लाइव सेशंस या लेक्चर्स मोकलन इंशाल्लाह तम पता है a long term workshop यम excursion academic senior academic तिमन से तो शेन सत रेत पेट जेल तिमन स्टूडेंट से यम प्लान चकरा जसास त्रोगु एंड ये जसास सोवास नाम तो इंशाल्लाह मैं हफ्ते करो तो ऐसे बे मुलाकात करने की कोशिश करता हूं रोज़ भी तो खुदा सवाल अस्सलाम वालेकुम